I'd like to speak a little bit about the effects of the pending eviction crisis on homelessness. As you know, the homelessness crisis has been a crisis for a long time in the United States, and it's primarily a crisis that disproportionately impacts people of color, particularly Black Americans and Indigenous Americans, who are overrepresented in the homeless population by factors of 4 to 8. The homelessness crisis, while often portrayed as a crisis of mental health and substance use, is and has always been a crisis of the devastating lack of affordable housing, of the effects of structural racism, and of income inequality full scale. The COVID crisis has both increased the costs of homelessness, as you may have heard about devastating outbreaks of COVID in congregate shelters, of much more difficulties for people facing homelessness who are not in shelter because of closure of food programs and libraries and other places where people could seek some form of mild relief. There are current estimates that there will be increases in homelessness on the order of 20 to 40% unless decisive action will be taken through the crises that we're talking about currently. What will happen to families and households when they become evicted? For many, as Emily Benfer noted, that people leave eviction and move to less stable housing. They double up with others. They enter into crowded households. But for many, they fall directly from eviction into homelessness. Or for others, they move into these overcrowded housing where things are unstable, and after a period of a year or two, they eventually fall into homelessness. This is where our concerns lie. Right now, what would happen if you became homeless is more complicated than it's ever been. In about 50% of Americans who are homeless are sheltered. On the West Coast, it's only about a third of people are in shelters when they're homeless. Homeless shelters have become decidedly more worrisome because of the impacts of COVID, and thus many places have really decreased access to shelter. So you see rises in unsheltered homelessness because of the difficulty of having shelters. We worry that there will be dramatic increases in unsheltered homelessness. What would it take to end homelessness in this country? It has to be a dramatic expansion of extremely low-income housing, as well as a dramatic expansion of rental support. There is the HEROES Act, which has passed the House but is being held up by the Senate, would provide dramatic rental relief funds, but it is not going through right now. Currently, pre-pandemic, only 1 in 4 households in this country who met the strict criteria for rental relief from the federal government received it because it is a limited resource. The cost to fully fund that is about $31 billion a year. We currently spend about $12 billion on shelter, but we leave most homeless people who are homeless unsheltered. Just again, give you a sense of scale. So I think being that this is a problem that so disproportionately affects people of color, particularly Black and Indigenous Americans, we anticipate that the eviction crisis will disproportionately impact those communities as well. And we are anticipating, at the very worst time we possibly could have, dramatic increases in homelessness. When children are evicted, they have severe, it causes disruptions in schooling and disruptions in education, mental health problems, et cetera. I will say that family homelessness and sort of the equivalent of homelessness in Latinx populations often looks a little different than it does for single adults, that families often will do everything that they can to avoid showing up in shelter systems or in unsheltered settings because children get removed from households. And so there's a little bit of a definitional issue here where many families who really would be homeless but are not counted as homeless because what they are is living in extraordinarily overcrowded housing situations because those families are doing everything that they can to avoid showing up in the homeless system because of the risk that the children will be removed from the families.